And Calton, I see that you're connected, but I need to see you on camera. You're doing all right? You can see me and hear me? Yes, okay. Mackenzie, I see you're connected, but I need to see you. Yeah, also Brooke and Cheyenne. Okay, I see Mackenzie. Very good. Thank you. And Brooke, I see you. Very good. And Cheyenne, I see you. And Caitlin. Okay, and I have Jackson connecting. Okay, and Jackson, I need to see you on camera to give you credit. Very good. Okay. Hello, Jackson.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. You're not driving, are you?
No, I'm walking in the gym actually. I'm doing some chest
Okay,
muscle.
okay, you scare me. I've had
Yeah.
students whose girlfriends are driving them while they do some work, but okay, okay. And Taylor, I need to see you on camera, even just a little bit, just to give you credit. Very good, very good. I'm glad you could join. Okay, so I'm gonna keep an eye on anybody that connects a little bit late, but I want to go ahead and get started. And I want to remind you that you do have a lot of resources about the calculator. Sometimes, we wish we would have maybe a resource for every little example that there is, and that's just not gonna be always possible. But remember, I have a lot of tools that I can use in the discussions. So if you have a calculator question, Allison, you need to be on camera so that I can give you credit, at least when you first log in. So there you are. Okay. 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 So like I said, I have a lot of tools that I can use. I can do quick pictures of the calculator. I can actually do short videos sometimes if that's necessary. But you have some tools here already in the class that even though they may not be the exact question that you're asking, they're all related to what we're actually doing right now in Unit 1 using the TI-84 calculator. So I mentioned at the last Zoom meeting how the Zoom meetings were actually broken down. Sorry, how the unit modules were broken down, and just a little bit above your required assignments, you see this label that says TI-84 calculator instructions. So when you click on the actual link, these are topics pertaining to Unit 1, exercises pertaining to Unit 1 that I have actually made videos using the TI-84 calculator. Setting up a window, basic graphing, which is some of the things that we're going to go over today. Also linear regression, and that's actually section 2.1. That's the reason why we have this Zoom meeting so close to the last one. Is because I want to make sure that we go over the calculator before you do section 2.1. Even section 1.3 and 4 had things you could do on the calculator, but there's a major topic in section 2.1 called linear regression that you will not be able to do without the calculator. So that's the reason we're having this. We have these resources here. We have the Zoom meeting, And in addition to those topics, those videos that I have made related to the TI-84 calculator for every unit, remember you have that TI-84 toolbox, and the students in group A have actually already found lots and lots of videos. And one of the reasons why I want group B and C to comment on a video is because I need to approve it, not because because it's a bad video or anything like that, but I want to make sure that it pertains what we're doing in Unit 1. So you have already a collection of videos here to help you out. And in some of the comments, if group B has done their part, there may even be some descriptions of what those videos are. So all of that is there, but sometimes we have a hard time just kind of finding resources, but they're here. They're here. And the other thing that I want to tell you is after tomorrow's meeting, sometime tomorrow, I am going to post this recording in the Zoom meetings module, and I'm going to post it right underneath here, and I'm going to also post some of the written notes that I make. Now, this calculator workshop PDF file that I mentioned in an email this morning is it's kind of like an outline for myself so I don't forget what I want to tell you about the calculator, but also in some cases you can actually write some notes. So I'm gonna follow, you should be seeing my document now. I'm gonna follow this, and sometimes I'm gonna come back to it to make a few notes. So let me go actually to the calculator, and I had to open it, but it was acting up, so I needed to close it. God. There, it's coming up. Okay. I think it might still be loading. There it goes. Okay, so you should be seeing the calculator. Anytime that you are in a screen and you want to get out of it, if you go second and mode, that will get you out of a screen. Let me clear all of that. Okay, so I already used the second key, but what I wanted to tell you is every key on the calculator has what we call the primary key, which is the key right on, or the function right on the key. So this is, the primary key is the number 7. Here, the primary key is the x squared. But every key also has a second function, and that is in blue, and we use actually that second key. So take, for example, the square. And let's say you want to take -3 and square it. You get that? But if instead you want to take a square root, you have to go second and the square root. And then you're going to put in whatever number you're taking the square root of, and it will find it for you. If it's not exact, it will actually do an approximation. So there are a lot of functions that are not the primary function, but they're the second function, and that's what that second key is for. Now, I also got a little bit ahead and used the negative here, but I want you to realize there is a negative sign symbol, and there is a minus, and that is a subtraction. So here I put a -3. If I put a minus, the calculator is going to give me an error. Like, to see, at first that may look the same to you when you square it, but the calculator is not going to like that. It's going to give you an error. A syntax error, a lot of times, it means that we use the wrong symbol. So let's say you want to say 5 minus 7. And it gives you a -2. See how much longer the minus, the subtraction is, and how much shorter the negative sign is. a lot of times when a student emails me and tells me I'm getting errors or I'm not getting the right answer, one of the first things I said is check, like if you're graphing your windows, but check your signs. Make sure that you're not using a minus instead of a negative. Now, something else that could be really helpful is also the x minus 1. That's called the reciprocal key. So, for example, if you have 2 and you want to take the reciprocal, most likely it will change it to a decimal of 0.5, but it's really a 1/2. Sometimes you want to take the reciprocal of a fraction. So I want to show you something a little bit about fractions. Okay, so let's say you did this 2 raised to the negative 1 and you got a 0.5. Maybe it would be something more complicated than that. And you realize when you read the problem that you want the answer as a fraction. I know 0.5 is fairly easy, it's a 1/2, but let's say it's something more complicated. This math key, the first 2 settings in that menu for the math key are to change to a fraction or to change to a decimal. We want to change it to a fraction, so I press 1 or enter. And it's taking the answer from the previous step and it's going to change it into a fraction, but then I press enter and it will change it to a fraction. So let's say we do some operation and we come up with something like 17 divided by 3. And there's nothing wrong with that, but a lot of times, and especially in your online homework, you're asked very specific ways of writing your answer. And they say write it as a fraction, but you divide it for whatever reason. So again, math menu, you want to press 1 or enter. Enter because it's already on the 1. Then press enter again, and it's going to change it into a fraction. And if for some reason you get a fraction, but then you realize you want a decimal, then go to that math menu, choice number 2 to change to a decimal, press enter, and it will change it into a decimal. So that's a quick conversion. But what if you just want to keep your answers or your work in fractions? There are ways to enter fractions in here and keep it that way. So I'm going to go ahead and show you the fractions menu. And that's something that a lot of times students have trouble remembering how to get to it. Like it makes sense, it might make sense right now, but later on, you're gonna be wondering where was that fraction menu? So you're gonna go alpha, and I'll show you in a second. And y equals. And I'm going to show you what that is. You're accessing something that says F1. There are lots and lots of menus hidden in the calculator. And some of them are actually in green. So you see, for example, F1, F2, F3, F4. Those are lots and lots of different menus. But the alpha y equals will actually get you to the fraction menu. Now, let me quit this and let me go back to the handout. And like I said, this would be very specific. Like say you have a problem that already has fractions and you want to work with fractions. Okay, so let's say you had something like this. You had a negative 1/2 plus 5/6 minus a negative 11/3. And you don't want to be changing, every little part into, or do a division and then change it into a fraction. I just want to enter the whole thing like that. That's when this fraction menu will come in handy. So let's go back to the calculator. Let me clear everything I have done. Let me clear the keystrokes. And now I'm going to enter the negative 1/2. So that's a negative. So I start with negative, then I go alpha y equals, but I need to press 1 to choose this or press enter. So now see, it makes it a fraction format. So you have 1, and I'm using these arrows here, go down to 2. Now I'm going to move my cursor to the level of the fraction bar. So then we have plus 5, 6. So I have plus, but I have another fraction. So alpha y equals choice number 1. And that would be 5, 6. And then I have minus, it's a minus, but in parentheses, I had a negative 11/3. So it's a minus here. I open parentheses, then I have a negative fraction again, alpha y equals choice number 1. And then I have 11/3. If you remember anything about fractions from maybe high school, middle school, in order to add and subtract fractions, you need to get a common denominator. That means I would have to change almost every fraction to get a common denominator, then change the numerators, and then combine the numerators only and reduce. The calculator will do it all at once for you. And it turns out to be exact. That's unusual, but it turns out to be exact. And if it was not exact, it will keep it in fraction form. It will not turn it into a decimal. So this can come really, really handy. Now, so I've talked about all of those different parts, the fraction to key, fraction to decimal, decimal to fraction. Remember, that's in the math menu. Now, the mode, it's another key that we actually use a lot. Notice that in blue you have the word quit. So let's say for some reason you find yourself in somewhere else, but you want to go back to that operation screen where you add, subtract, multiply. So second mode will actually let you quit, and it will bring you back to the operation screen. This is the operation screen. Okay, now I want to show you the mode itself. The mode is another menu, and I usually tell my students, if you have everything on the far right selected, from math print all the way to full, usually you are in good shape. Now, the radian and the degree, it relates more to trigonometry, so it's not a big deal. But to be on the safe side, before you get to the blue part fraction type, just make sure everything is selected. If something is not selected, it looks like the radians, but degree is selected. You can move your cursor to the word degree, press enter. And now if you notice, radians are selected and not degree. That's not too important for us, but if you're wondering what all of those things are, it has a lot to do with the format, how things are, how things look, how to express it. To be on the safe side, make sure all of them are on. All of the ones on the far left are on. Now, some calculators don't have all these other options that you see here, like fraction type, answers, stack diagnostics, and so on. When we get to the regression part, which is what you do in section 2.1, I'll come back and I'll talk about the diagnostics being on and off. For right now, I want to actually turn mine off so that when we get to the regression part, I can show you what you're missing and how to get it back. Okay, so that's the mode. And a lot of times it changes how you express the decimal places, but I would recommend to keep it on the floating notation so it shows you as many decimal places as possible. Okay, so now we're going to get to the part where we're graphing functions. So to graph an equation, you need to use actually the y equals, but you need the variable x. So that's one of the first things that I want to show you. And here you have that key that says x, t, theta, and n. For algebra, x is really the most common variable. So this represents the x. The y equals is where you enter your equations. And by the way, everything that has to do with graphing relates to the one of these buttons here. The y equals, the window, the zoom, the trace, and the graph. So let's go to the y equals. I have something here left over. I think it's from somebody who asked a question about this in the discussion. But I have this function here. So I'm going to clear that. Also, something else that sometimes, let me do this. Something else that may happen is you're graphing equations, you're graphing continuous graphs. You come here and this plot 1 is on. That's a problem. It needs to be off. Plot 2 is off, plot 3 is off. So to turn plot 1 off, go and move your cursor to plot 1, press enter, and now you move away and it's right there. It's clear. Okay, so what is going to happen is this is the y equals, and this is where you want to write an equation, enter an equation. You cannot graph an equation unless you cannot graph it at all unless you enter an equation for it. You cannot set up a table for it unless you have an equation in here. So let me go back to the handout. But sometimes some equations are not, don't have the y isolated. So what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to subtract 2x from both sides. It cancels out from this side. I'm going to actually run out of space here. So on this side, I get a 3y equals. On the other side, I cannot add the 6 and the negative 2x. So that will be a negative 2x plus 6. Now we're going to divide both sides by 3. And that means every term divided by 3. So then you have y equals negative 2/3 x, but 6 divided by 3 will be a 2. Now you have y isolated, and we're ready to enter that into the y equals. You have to have y by itself in order to graph a function in the calculator. So you may be, say you're here, you go to the y equals, you have make sure the plot, the plot 1, 2, and 3 are off because it doesn't relate to equations and continuous graphs. Not yet, we don't need it not, here. If there were any functions already from like a previous exercise, make sure you clear them. Now I'm gonna enter the equation. So I have negative, but then I wanna use the fraction key. So I have alpha y equals to get to f1, press enter to use the fraction. So you have 2/3. Then we had x, so I put the variable x, and then we had plus 2. So you've entered the equation. So the next thing you want to do is you want to set up a window to graph it. Now, sometimes you're given what the window should be, and then you can go to window and set that up. But a quick way to look at the graph and make sure you have a decent window is to go to the zoom menu, in particular zoom 6. That sets up the standard window, and the standard window means 10 units in every direction. Okay, so we had y equals, we have this function. Now I'm going to go to we're just going to go to zoom. I'm going to press 6 to get that standard window. And the calculator automatically chose negative 10 to 10 on the x-axis, negative 10 to 10 on the y-axis, and increments of 1. So if you don't know what would be a good window to graph, I always say start with the standard window, which is zoom 6. But other times you're given a specific numbers, or maybe you want to get close to that right there. So then you come to the window and you can enter any values that you like. So let's say we want to get a little bit closer. So we want to go from -5 to 5. Remember, it's a negative. This is my X minimum, my X maximum. The minimum is to the left, the maximum is to the right. And I want to keep an X scale of 1, increment of 1. And now I want to do something similar for the Y values, go from -5 to 5. So I go to the Y minimum, that is below the X axis. So I change it to -5. Then the Y maximum, and let's say we pick 5. And then the Y scale, I'm going to keep it at 1. All the other three entries that you see right here, you really don't need to mess with. It's better if the X resolution is 1, but this is not something that we actually messed up with. Maybe there are other more advanced situations where you might. Okay, so now, then we're ready to graph. So it's the same line, but now I chose a window that went from -5 to 5 for the x's and -5 to 5 for the y's. Sometimes you just want to look a little bit closer. Now, I want to show you also the trace key, because remember I said everything you need for graphing is right here in these 4 buttons at the top. So let me first not press trace, but just start moving my arrow, okay? That's your cursor. Trace is a very neat feature because it's gonna move, but it's gonna move on the graph. So if you trace and you move to the right, it's moving along the graph. Not only that, you can actually find points that are on the graph. Using the trace, the only drawback is that it stays on this window right here. So let's say you're looking at this value here and it's not a whole number, like for x equals 2, but the y value is not a whole number. So you have the trace on and now press 2 and it gives you a prompt for x. You actually are telling the calculator, if x equals 2, what is the y value of the function? Press enter, and it moves to that particular place. And it actually gives you a decimal. You could always divide 2 by 3, and that will give you 0.666 if that's what you need. I can enter 0. And that will be this point right here. But I suspect that it's actually exact. Press enter. That's exactly 2. Let's say we have -2. But the trace has to be on. Press enter. And that gives you actually a decimal. I thought maybe it was exact, but my eyes were deceiving me because it's actually 10/3, which turns out to be 3.13 or so as a decimal. Now, so now I'm going to show you the table feature of the calculator. And one thing that I want you to realize on the calculator here is that you have the table as the second key for the graph, second function, and you have the table setup as the second key for the window. However, graphing and a table require an equation. So we really, when you're setting up a table, we always start out here with the y equals, and we enter our equation. So let's say I want a table for this. I don't want to have to do all my calculations by hand, so I want to set up a table. So I'm going to go to table setup, so that would be second and window. So this table start is asking you, where do you want to start your table? And let's say we pick -5. It's really not a big deal. because as you're going to find out, you can scroll up and down on the table. Now, this little triangle stands for delta. If you've ever had chemistry, delta means change. So this is telling you, it's asking you, what do you want the increments to be for the x? And I'm going to keep it at 1. Then something that is not right here is I want the independent variable to automatically populate. So right now, ask is selected. So I want to move my cursor to auto and press enter. And see, now it's selected. So now you're ready to look at the graph. So you need to go second and graph. And what the calculator is doing is finding the y values for that function for all these values. But remember I said, what if I change my mind and I wanted to start with -7? You don't have to redo the table, because if you move with the up arrows, it will give you other values there. If you want to keep going down here, you find other values. Now, I find it a little bit hard to think about the graph with fractions. Fractions are nice, kind of exact, but I think maybe I'm thinking decimals will be better. Remember, when I entered the equation, I kind of went the fancy way with the F1 menu, so I entered this as a fraction. So what I could do is not enter it as a fraction, but enter it as a division. But if I do that, I have to, let me show you. I have to put parentheses, then have -2 divided by 3, close the parentheses, then put my x plus 2. And the reason why I repeated it in y2 is because I want you to see that they're the same thing. They turn out to be the same graph. So when you graph it, you're going to see the blue one first, and then the red one is going to go right on top of it very quickly. But see, they coincide. If you trace, it tells you you're actually on the blue one. If you go up, it doesn't move, but it tells you that you're now in the red one. They're at the same line, okay? So, but now that I am using a decimal here, then I'm gonna clear the one that I have in Y1. Let me clear that. And now I wanna look at the table for this graph. So remember, you go to second and window for the table setup. Let's say you want to start again with -5. You want the increments in the table to be 1 and the independent and dependent variables to be on auto. So now I can set up the table. So you have second and graph, and see, it has now turned those numbers into decimals. So if you want fractions for whatever reason, then you have to enter that fraction really as a fraction using that F1 menu. It's kind of fancy, but that will keep it as fractions. If you don't want fractions, you have to be very careful and put that in parentheses right there. I want to go back here because, again, you're going to be using some of these things over and over again, but I think that table and table setup are they're hard to remember where to find them. So you go second, and let me see what that is. I think it's a y equals, but yeah, second window, and that's to access the table setup. Now, if you go second graph, that's how you access the table. You can view the table. But what I want to remind you is that this requires an equation. you first have to put your equation in the y equals. You can set up a table for almost any equation as long as y is isolated, but you have to put an equation in the y equals in order for this to work. Okay, I want to show you also finding the 0 and the x-intercept, and we're going to use that same graph that we have right here. We can sometimes guess what it is. So I'm going to go back to the graph. Okay, and the 0 is the place where the graph crosses the x-axis. I can kind of guess, I'm going to get rid of all this keystrokes. I can kind of guess that my 0 is a negative, it's a positive 3. But what if it was falling between two whole numbers? Then I really want to find it quickly from the graph. So again, you need an equation here. We set up a window or do zoom 6. So when I graph it, I physically see the graph crossing the x-axis. Then now I'm going to trace, activate the trace. So sometimes you can find the value. Like if you suspect that's a 3, then you can use the trace and put a 3, press enter, and it's going to give you exactly 0. So, but that's only because I could tell that it was a 3. If you cannot tell that it's a 3 or a whole number, then we use actually the calculate menu. You see that it says calc under trace. So you go second, calculate. You can calculate a lot of numerical things here. The value of a function, the 0 or x-intercept. In unit 2, the minimum and the maximum. 5, we're going to see that today, the intersection, but that really is from unit 2, but we're going to see it. 6 and 7 have to do with calculus and numerical derivatives and integrals, and we don't do that here. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to find the 0 for that function. So again, you have your equation, you graphed it, you want to find exactly what this 0 or x-intercept is. Let's say that is not exact. So you go second trace. You want to go to 0. So press 2. And it goes through a series of almost like questions. It says left bound. That means you want to position your cursor to the left of the 0 that you're trying to find. And then press enter. Then it says right bound. That means you want to move your cursor to the right of the 0. Press enter. Then press enter again. It says guess. It's really a very good estimate. It's not really guessing, but we want to say yes. So we press enter and then it finds it exactly. So it can come in very handy if it's not an exact value like it was here. So again, it's something that you need to use, you should be, or you will be using a lot. So we found that it was a 0. No, it was a 3-0. But the way you do that is you go second trace. And that's to use the calc menu. When you want to calculate something about the graph, something from the graph. And in this case, we chose number 2, which was the 0. And then remember that it takes you through left bound, so you are to the left of the 0. Right bound, you move the cursor to the right of the 0. And then guess, you press enter and it will find it for you. Now, something that you're going to see in unit 2. So it's a little bit ahead of time here, but it could be really helpful. And it also relates to that calculate menu, is the intersection of two linear equations. So I kind of cheated here, and I used the same one that we were using before. So this one, it's actually that y equals negative 2/3 x plus 2. No, plus, yeah, plus 2. Let me just look back before I make a mistake. Yes. So I already did that. But so that would be kind of like maybe your y1 or y2. And then you have a new function here. So to find the intersection of two linear functions, you need two equations. So I'm going to go back to the calculator, and you're going to go to y equals. I already put that other one in there. It may not be in the nicest format, but I already have this one here. So for y1, I'm going to put in the 2x. Okay, so I don't know what would be an appropriate window for this. Like, I don't know exactly where they intersect. That's what I'm trying to find. So I'm going to go with sum 6. Okay, now I don't want to just estimate what that is, but as long as you can physically see the two lines intersecting, this could be an appropriate window. You don't have to really do a whole lot with the window. But if that intersection was off the grid here, then you have to adjust the window. But right now, that's perfectly okay. So now we want to calculate the intersection of the two graphs. So that's going to be, again, in the calculate menu. So second and trace. Notice that 5 is intersection. It doesn't refer to x-intercept or y-intercept. It actually refers to the intersection of two graphs. So I press 5. So now another set of checkpoints. Is this your first curve? Yes, it is. So we press enter. Then it jumps to the second one. And see, this gives you an opportunity to see if you entered the equation right. And if you didn't, you go back to the y equals. So that's correct. So I press enter. And there it goes again using that word guess. It's saying, are you ready for me to guess? But it really is going to estimate as accurate as possible. So to say yes, we press enter. And it moves exactly to the point of intersection of the two graphs. And it's 0.75 and 1.5. And looks are deceiving because when I first looked at this, I thought maybe they're exact. But you don't want to try like be changing the windows just to see if it's exact, because this will give you the best estimate possible. So let me go to the handout and let me write that intersection. So it actually turned out to be 0.75 for x and 1.5 for y. But again, what I want you to remember is if you're looking for the intersection of two graphs, then it would be second and trace. So when you go second and trace, you are accessing the calc menu. But this time it was choice 5, intersect. And this will come in very, very handy. It's like I said, especially section 6.1, which is part of unit 2. Okay, so you may or may not be already working with 2.1. I think that what's due today is maybe the progress quiz for 1.3, 1.4. Maybe tomorrow you do your diagnostic quiz, but we're not in section 2.1. It's not due yet. But this is actually from section 2.1. However, this is a common theme all throughout the course, this idea of scatter plots and regression. In unit 1, we do linear regression. In unit 2, we do quadratic regression. Unit 3, we do polynomial regression. And in unit 4, we do 3 other types. And basically what regression does is It takes data points and it tries to find an equation that fits the points the best. But the scatter plot, just like the name suggests, scatter plot is a bunch of data points that are scattered. They're not connected by a particular equation, at least not at first when we're given that. So this is an example from section 2.1. It says the table lists average tuition and fees in dollars at private colleges for selected years. Okay, so typically we call this X, we call this Y in algebra. But since it's data, isolated data points, we're going to put them in the list 1 and the list 2. And in order to access those lists, you're going to be using the stat menu. Okay, so right here, I'm going to enter 1995, 2000, 2005, and 2010 in my list 1. And I'm going to enter those other numbers. I'm actually going to take a picture of them so I don't make you dizzy going back and forth between this screen and the calculator. But you have to be careful when you enter the Y values in L2. Then you have 12,432, 16,233, and so on. Okay, so let's go to the calculator. And everything we have been doing related to equations or operations. These are equations and we graph them in here or set up a table. When I quit the screen, second mode, this is the operation screen. But we're going to now enter the part of the functions class that has to do with statistics, and that is regression, scatter plots. So we use the stat menu. And the three names or the three words at the top represent a different menu. This is the edit menu, this is the calculate menu, and this is the test menu. We do not use the test menu at all in this class. When we do calculate regressions, we use the calculate menu. But right now, we are in the edit menu. And what we want to do is we want to enter our data in the list or edit the list. So we really want the edit menu and we want the choice option 1. So you either press 1 or enter and you're here. Now, these are values from some other number, some other problem that I've done, maybe even from last semester. So I want to clear them. Be careful because you never want to use delete in your list. If you delete an entry. Let me show you. But please don't go and press delete until I show you. So delete can be used to delete one entry. But if you want all the entries to go, you want the list to be clear, do not use delete. So what we're going to do is we're going to move the cursor to L1. And now we're going to press clear and enter. That clears the whole list. Delete is only one entry, but you don't want to use delete at the very top here where the L1 is, because it will actually delete the place for L2. And there's a way to get it back, but until you ask me and figure out how to get it back, it's going to mess you up because you're going to have different numbers here, different lists. If you delete L2, then it's going to use L1 and L3. And that's going to be confusing. So you want to clear a list, but only delete an entry. I just clear everything. So I move my cursor to L2, then I clear and enter, and it enters the whole thing. And it clears the whole thing. So in my L1, I'm going to enter the years. And I had 1995, 2000, 2005, and 2010. So those are all my, oh, I made a mistake. Okay, so no need to clear the whole list, no panic. I don't really even have to delete it. I just move my cursor here and override it. Put 2010 and it will press enter and it will override it. Then you go to L2 and you're going to enter the cost, the Y values, and that is 12,432. Press enter. 16,233. Press enter. 21,235. Press enter. It's better to be slow at entering your information, but making sure that you're entering correctly instead of rushing and then making a mistake. But if you make a mistake, you just move your cursor up and override it. Now, let's say for some reason I get confused and I enter something else here. This is not going to work. A lot of times it gives you an error when you try to do anything like this because you need to have the same number of entries for L1 in L2. So that extra entry, I need to delete it. That's when you really want to delete something. Delete it completely. And now I double check my numbers and I have it. So the first thing you want to do is a scatter plot. So you need to adjust the window, but you need to realize your x's are not your typical values that you have where you have like -3 to 3 or 5 to -5 to 5. The smallest number is 1995 and the largest number is 2010. And you're going by increments of 5. So when you go to the window, I can make my X minimum 1995. My X maximum will be 2010. My X scale is 5 because it's going every 5 units. Now I want to look at my Y values and see what I could do for the Ys. They're not steady increments. This is not increasing by 4,000 or 2,000 or anything like that. But the lowest value is the 12,432 and the largest value is the 26,273. So what I could do is use the 12,432 as my Y minimum and then use the 26,273 as my maximum. And you know, there are about 14,000 units between 12,000 and 26,000. So about 14,000, but maybe by increments of 2,000. Or you could even do 1,000 if you wanted, but certainly not one. Then you're not going to be able to use your or see your units. So we don't put an equation in the Y equals. We actually put our data in the stat menu and edit. We adjust the window so that it includes those values. And now I'm almost ready to graph. And I say almost because you may not realize this, but we have some things in the Y equals that we don't need. So I'm going to clear those functions. But that's not really the biggest problem. The biggest problem I have is equations are graphed in the XY plane, but scatter plots are plot in that plot 1, plot 2, or plot 3. So I need to move my cursor to plot 1, press enter, and turn it on. Now I'm ready to hit graph, and what I see is only points. Now, let me go back to the handout because I think it will be helpful if I write a couple of things. I haven't mentioned about the diagnostics on, but clear and delete. So you clear lists and you delete only an entry. Not NP, but entry in spill. To clear a list, you really have to be on the heading. So you have to be really at the top on L1, and then you clear and enter. Okay, plotting points on StatPlot, the best way to turn on and off your StatPlot is go to the Y equals, select plot 1, and press enter. Like move your cursor to plot 1 and then press enter. There are other ways. That's what that stat plot is suggesting, but this really will be the simplest way to do that. Okay. Okay, so now let me come back here to some of these questions. When they ask you to find, so the scatter plot, everything that I show you here, basically A, C, and D, but everything I have shown you right in these parts are actually for the scatter plot. Now, when it asks you to find a formula in the slope-intercept form for the linear, for a linear function that models the data, or they say find the regression line or the least squares regression line. All of those words, models the data, find a regression line, and the least squares regression line is referring to finding a linear equation that will actually fit these points the best. So in this case, you go to the stat menu and you want to calculate. And always use the first regression. So that's choice number 4. So you're going to press 4. And it goes through a series of checkpoints. It's asking you, do you want your x's to come from L1? Yes, and that's the default. Do you want the y's to come from L2? That's the default. That's why if you delete a list, it's going to kind of mess things up and change them here. The frequency list should be blank. The store regression equal or equation should be blank. Now we go to the word calculate, press enter, and you have that. So what the calculator has done, it has actually found the slope for a line and the y-intercept that will fit these points the best. So let me go back here and I'm going to write my answer here is y equals 930.5 x minus 1,844 and 283. Now, I'm kind of ignoring the diagnostics on for right now. Now you want to graph that equation and the data. So now you go back to the y equals and you enter that equation. So you have 930.5 x and then minus 1,844,000 and then 283. Okay, so now we graph, but I had already set up my window to include the data points, and I had already graphed the data points. So when I graph it, I will see both the line and the data points. So that line that the calculator found is the best approximation for these points. Is the line that will fit these points the closest. And it looks like it goes through two of them for sure. It misses this one a little bit and then this one a little bit. But this is the line of best fit. This is the regression line, and the calculator has actually calculated that for you. So just like an equation, and everything was graphed using this, but it's related to an equation. The table was related to an equation. A scatter plot and this regression line relates to the data that you enter on edit. Stat, and then press 1 in the edit menu, and this data you have here. Now, to calculate the regression line, you go Stat, but you move to Calculate, choice number 4, Calculate, and you have that. How many of you are seeing some other entries here besides that, like R square? You're gonna learn about that, and that's the correlation coefficient. If you're seeing what I'm seeing, that means I need to do something with the diagnostics on, okay? So if your calculator has an extended menu on the mode, then you're gonna go back down to where it says Stat Diagnostics. You're gonna move your cursor to your word on, to the word on, press enter. And now when I repeat this, Stat, Calculate, choice number 4, to calculate the linear regression, and I go down to calculate, it's not only going to find the slope and the y-intercept, but it's going to find the regression, the correlation coefficient. And the closest the correlation coefficient is to 1, then the best fit this line is to the points. The closest is they are to a straight line. Now, if your calculator doesn't have this extended menu, I want to show you something that you may not even have. Actually, I don't even have it on. Let me turn it on. You may have slightly different version of the calculator. So right here in the modules, in the Zoom meetings, since it's related to the calculator, in Zoom meeting 2, I just opened up and posted that diagnostics on the TI-84 if it's not in the mode. So if you click on it, this is just a short video on how to turn on your mode in a different way if you don't have it in your sorry, how to turn on your diagnostics on if it's not in your mode. So if you're in that situation, that's right here. So that's all I had prepared for today. It's just a very quick overview of the most important features of the calculator. The calculator is a very important part of this course. I would say almost every section has things that you can do using the calculator. But there are certain topics like section 2.1 regression where you cannot answer half of the questions you cannot answer without the calculator. So if you have not gotten your calculator, this probably wasn't very helpful, but you need to get your calculator before you work on section 2.1. Okay? I don't know how far you are from campus, but the library has calculators to check out for free. The only time you pay for it is if you lose it, break it, and don't return it. Okay? And just don't hesitate to ask questions in the math Q&A discussion, questions that relate to the calculator, because like I said, I can make a short video, I can show you screenshots, I can do a lot of things with the calculator. Okay? Okay, so have a good evening.
All right.
Okay. Thank you so much.